In December of last year, Beatport added this remix to their best new dance and electropop chart and playlist. But to make the remix, the producer only had 6 hours to get it done. So in this video, I'll reveal the story of how I wrote, structured, mixed, and mastered a remix of Toronto artist Kylo's song Sunsets in just 4 quick steps that even beginner producers can use for their own remix projects. By the end of this video, we're going to see if it's possible to write, structure, mix, and master a professional quality remix in under 6 hours by using a simple production technique that most artists ignore. What you're listening to right now is the finished remix that we'll be breaking down today. Because having produced music for over 15 years, remixing songs in this specific way is easily the fastest and most fun way that I've come across. You can download this video's project files, as well as over 30 full project files inspired by Beatport Top 100 songs, with new files being added weekly. Just visit the link on screen or in the description. And if finishing songs super fast like this is something you'd like help with, you can also download a free bundle of templates, samples, and special bonuses that I use to completely finish one song per week. But for now, let's start with the first of the 4 quick and easy steps we'll be covering today. First, make sure your song is inspired by the quality of a professional example by choosing a reference track. But stop yourself from straight up copying your reference by having a new hook to focus on. So for each one of my projects, I like to make a project file page like this to act as a guide to show you all the little production tips in more detail and the overall process, so you can kind of look at it at your own pace. But for this one, so the new hook, the remix that I ended up working on was this song called Sunsets by Kylo. And the way this kind of came to be is a dude named Michael, who has like a radio station show in Ontario, has been like spinning a bunch of my stuff for a little while. And we kind of like developed a bit of like a back and forth on Instagram. So at one point he mentioned that he's been doing some work with a really cool label out of Toronto called Free-99 or Free 99. And they were doing a remix album for one of their artists, and he wanted me to see if potentially I might be able to come up with something. So they gave me a couple options, and I liked the Sunsets one in particular. It seemed like it was ripe to be changed up quite a lot, and so that's kind of how I ended up picking that. And then for the reference track, in particular, it was the Seb Jr. dude that I was kind of like doing a deep dive into their stuff and kind of getting all excited about their music. And when I came across this particular remix, it just had this cool combination of like funky and spaciness and soulfulness that I thought was really, really, really cool, and something that I wanted to try to also emulate. And it seemed like it could be a good fit over top of this cool like electro-pop female vocalist kind of idea. But at this point, you might be wondering if you were doing your own, like finding a new hook and a reference and trying to figure out how to mash them together, and if it actually would work together, and if it makes sense for you to spend time and energy working on a remix just to find out maybe like the keys clash, or it doesn't actually work and the idea isn't worth spending all this time on. So the main thing is you can do a little bit of basic music theory at the start here to kind of save you a lot of grief later on. So what I'll do is I'll look up some information, like for example, the reference track is in the key of C minor, and the remix, the new hook, is in the key of C. So this presents potentially a problem, because one is in a minor key and one is in a major key. So they actually have notes that are off of each other. But if you open up this little cheat sheet that I have here, if we go to C minor and we go to C major, we can see what the difference is, like what the 2 or 3 notes that are off. And now this can give us some information on maybe when we're building our progression, we just skip these notes, for example. Another thing that we can do is if we head over to C major, and the relative minor of the C major is A minor, so it actually shares the same notes. It's just the position starts at a different note. So C major and A minor are essentially the same thing. And then now the difference between A minor and C would be 1, 2, 3, 4 semitones. So that gives you an idea of like, we can actually flip it to the relative minor and then be working with like the distance of like 3 or 4 semitones or whatever it was. So just a little bit of music theory here can kind of help you wrap your head around making 2 keys work together. It doesn't have to actually be the exact same key for it to work. there's a lot of options that you can do when you know a little bit of this interesting music theory, particularly with like that circle of fifths there and relative minors and majors. That kind of stuff can really open up what's possible when you're building out a track. Then the next thing here is just the tempo. So the reference track is at 125 BPM and the remix is 120. So those are fairly close. The main thing you're looking for is if it was a very, very large distance, you kind of might like be chipmunking up the voice or like killing the original character of the sound if it's too much of a pitch difference. But in this example, that's a pretty close area and we can easily meet in the middle or push one into the direction of the other and go on pretty easily. But really the key takeaway here is to do what I just did there. So think through the vision of your song at the beginning, have a look at the keys and play them over each other, really kind of think it through and kind of get excited about what you're about to work on. And this is going to give you that confidence knowing that it's going to be a worthwhile idea for you to push through and stay motivated from start to finish. But none of this will matter unless you actually grab these files and throw them into your music making software. So what I will do next, and we're going to jump into, is grab both of these tracks and throw them into my particular template, and then use AI to separate out things so we can start pitching things around, overlapping things, and actually make sure that these ideas are compatible. You can find dedicated tutorials on that like template, and a lot of the stuff I'm going to be talking about in this guide in more detail in this actual guide here. And all of these videos are also in a playlist that is in the link in the description as well if you want to stay on YouTube. But I should also mention, when you grab that free producer toolkit, you'll actually get access to these pages. You just won't be able to actually download the project files, but still super useful, really in detailed stuff here. But with that said, let's actually jump into Ableton now. All right, so this is a look at the Ableton project file for this one. And what's interesting about this track is this, I did finish this about a couple months ago. And this is where I was starting to like figure out the new way that I've been doing things. So this is where I've been experimenting with AI stem separation quite a bit and didn't quite have it dialed in like I have it now. So this isn't exactly how I'd go about things now, but this is an interesting look into kind of the process and how I've moved it to a pretty interesting place. So one of the things is, first thing is dropping the reference track in here. So I have the reference track in here, and then what I did is I built an arrangement or structure track. And so this is just empty MIDI clips that are color coded and show like the different sections of the song. This way it's going to help for when we're building out layers and trying to figure out the individual layers that we want to replicate in the reference. And then it's really, really useful when we're then taking our loop and extending it into a full song. So then what I've been doing here is, what I actually did is separated out the drums from the reference track here, or here, and then also separated all the melodic information. And so this was cool to kind of like figure out, be able to hear all the individual parts a little bit more closely. But actually something I've been doing recently is trying to move on to the building the melodic layers of the new song as quickly as possible. And a really good trick here is you could actually use the AI drum track to kind of create a little top loop and then slice out a kick drum from it so that we still have control over the kick. And then you can move quickly onto the bass and hear how that interacts with the vocals and the melodic stuff. I feel like it's important because the melodic stuff is really where your song could fall apart and the idea like maybe doesn't actually make sense. Harmony and melody and all that kind of stuff, how they interact together, that can sound objectively bad, which is good to get that out of the way. Fail quick and fail often is the idea. Because normally what I would do is build the drums, and I think that's what a lot of people do. Because it is nice, it's fun to do, and you have like something that you can add your melodic layers to using the drums as like a backdrop. So that's why it's nice to AI separate it first. But in this instance, I didn't do that, and we're going to go through kind of how I did it layer by layer. And so for me, the old way that I would do it would be the kick. So let's have a look and listen to the kick first. And so there's two layers going on here. It's on the 1, 2, 3, 4, just like this. Usually when I'm breaking down the drums, I'll follow kind of this pattern of first looking at the pattern, so the notes that it's playing, then the sound selection, and then the volumes. Following this order is going to be really the 80-20 rule here and get you a really pro sounding result quickly. And so in terms of the pattern, I've also set up my template so that it's already playing on the 1, 2, 3, and 4, because why punch those notes in every single time? You can set up your template to already be ready for you. And then in terms of the sound, what I used is this new tool called Drum Clone. Definitely check out some of my other videos for a more detailed look at this. But essentially what it does is you can grab a slice of the kick So either from the drum intro of an extended mix or the outro, or if you AI separate out the drums from your reference, you can grab a slice of it. And then usually the slice has like, hi-hats and crap over top of it. And when you drop this into a drum clone, you can hear here, what it actually does is it resynthesizes it. So it analyzes that slice, that drum slice, and then uses like sine waves and stuff like that to recreate it. So you have like a perfect synthesized kick that has kind of like the texture and vibe and character of the reference. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful way to go about it. Then what you can also do is when you have that nicely sliced out, you can right click on it and say show similar files. And this is going to look in your library and find similar sounds to the one that you have. It's going to use machine learning, AI crap or whatever to find something similar. So you've nicely isolated, and then you can find similar files inside of your library. And so what I've done here is I found one here, and I've layered on the, I think maybe, yeah. So I've removed a bunch of the low end on this show similar files kick that I found. And that way I can kind of have like the top end texture of the kick here layered in with like the full body, nicely resynthesized kick. Then in terms of any processing, some light stuff here. Sometimes it's fun to throw on some drum bus, and add in some of the boom. It kind of adds a little bit of more of like a nice subby low end character to the sound. And I'm just shelving out a little bit of high to kind of like make it, I felt like that like click, that punch of the kick was coming out a little bit too much. But the main thing here is to flick back and forth to your reference and dial in the volume. That's really one of the number one things that you can do here. Then moving on to the rest of the drums, because this is how I did it this time. We're going to kind of go through the kind of the standard practice here. So what this is, the best way to go about this when you're recreating drums like this, just listen, use your ear to find like the most important element to you. So for me, that's usually the kick. And then that's going to probably be like claps and snares, and then like open hats. And then it gets very detailed, like little bongos and stuff like that. So in this instance, the first sound that I heard was this clap. So let's take a look and listen to that. So this is a standard clap and snare pattern. So again, I've set up my template so that I already have at least one of these on the 2 and the 4 and the 2 and the 4, just like this. And then that way, what you can do is you can easily move that up and down in your drum rack to hear different sounds. You can also press Option and then like add layers very easily. And so in terms of the pattern here, we're on the 2 and the 4. What I have is 2 different clap sounds playing together. And then like on the second bar here, there's a little bit of a fill, and then also an additional sounds playing. So the idea of having different sounds playing at different times is a way to humanize it a little bit and make it sound a little bit more interesting. And then in terms of the sound selection, this is just a drum rack that I've made of some of my favorite like 5 or 6 or 7 clap sounds. Something I'd definitely recommend you doing for a bunch of the instruments, probably snares, claps, open hats, and closed hats. This way, when you're trying to reach for a clap sound in this instance, you have some signature sounds that you've already vetted that you really like, so you're not digging through like 200 sounds. And there's a little bit of a cohesion in like between song to song. It's a small thing, but like having some similar clap sounds or hi-hat sounds or whatever that are very subtle, but they're in each of your tunes, it kind of slowly builds up your sonic identity and who you are as an artist. So the end of the not double-edged sword, but like extra sharp sword of like, you can produce faster, which is nice because you're not spending so much time trying to listen to a million clap sounds. Then what we're running into is the standard channel strip that I have set up. So this is a little bit of a cherry on top, something you can do to mix as you go to make the sounds that you're adding in sound a little bit better as you're adding them in. So I'm going to go a little slower on this first one, and then we're going to be ripping through the layers. So standard stuff that I'll have is an EQ that's removing everything under 200 hertz. This way that it's making it cleaning up the space in that low end so the kick and the sub can come through nicely. And since I'm almost always doing that, I have it set up to every track is going to be removing the low end. This way, whenever I add something in new, it's already being automatically mixed a little bit, and you can kind of judge it as you're building it a little bit better. That's how I go about it. I'm not doing anything else in this instance, but usually I'll look at the transient. So I have this free kilohertz transient shaper to, you can play with the attack and the sustain here. I've just mapped the core knobs to the free plugin here, so it's faster for me to grab. Main thing I'll usually do is pull back the sustain, so this is a tighter sound. I feel like tighter sounds sound more professional, and you're a bit more in control, and you can kind of make them decay in like the notes. You can almost have a decay in like a quarter note, and more like musical sounding decays of your sounds. A little bit of sidechain is possible, but I'm not doing it in that instance. I set it up with a 1 knob here. So it's a Maxter Live shaper device pumping to quarter notes, which is where the kick is usually hitting. This way you can just dial it in with 1 knob instead of having to like route compressors and use triggers and all sorts of stuff that this just takes a lot of time. And the last one here that I'll usually reach for is this width, which is a free plugin called Polyverse Wider, and it's really good. But it's just a one big knob basically. So I've just mapped the main knob here, and that we can just dial it in. It pushes things to the left and right, makes things more stereo, and in the same process kind of makes up some space in the middle for the more important elements that you want in the middle, like for example vocals. But the main thing really is to flick back and forth and try to focus your ear on the clap in this instance when you're listening to the reference, and try to get something similar in terms of volumes. Next thing I added in was the snare, so let's have a look and listen to that. So this is a little bit more complicated, but to start it off, it was probably this right here. So this is just on the 2 and 4, just like the clap. So it's kind of reinforcing that. And then there's just these extra little patterns that I added in by flicking back and forth to the reference and then adjusting it to fit my sound a little bit more and my groove a little bit more. But it's essentially just like extra little flams on a snare that's adding some really cool, interesting groove to everything. If we kind of listen to that together with the kick, you'll be able to hear it a little bit nicer. Sounds sick as hell. In terms of the sounds, again, this is maybe 6 or 7 of my favorite snare sounds that I've added into this drum rack. And if you grab the project file, you'll be able to see all this stuff too. But just simplifies things and sounds good to my ear. And yeah, that's kind of the main thing there. In terms of any processing, we're removing some lows and we're bringing back some of that sustain to tighten up the decay of some of these snares. Main thing though is the volumes, and you're almost kind of like trying to get the clap and snare to sound cohesive together in terms of the volume there. The next element that I added in was this open hat. And so this is a standard open hat pattern. It's on the offbeat here. And again, so I have it set up so my template is already there. So it's just a matter of moving it around to try to hear different sounds that I have in my drum rack. And then you can also press Option to make a layer of it and add in layers for the sound, because we do have layers here in terms of the sound. One is one of my sounds that I've just picked. And the other one is I've actually sliced out some of the hi-hat from the AI drum split here, and just added that in. It just kind of worked pretty nicely there. In this instance, I'm bringing up some of the sustain so that the open hat's going out a little bit longer. And then what are we doing? Removing a bit of lows, pulling back the sustain on the overall open hat group to tighten it up just a little bit. And that's kind of that. Main thing again is the volumes. Next thing that I'll usually add in, similar to the idea of like the clap and the snare, having two, I like to have them reinforce each other. I'll usually reinforce the open hat right after with closed hat. So let's have a listen and a look at that. So basically this one started off like very simple like this, with an open hat like on the offbeat here. Like the open hat, it's on the offbeat and it's reinforcing that open hat, which is really cool because it can kind of like add a little bit of like extra punch to the open hat sound, and then adds a little bit of a like an arrangement trick because you can pull out the open hat and still have a closed hat kind of driving behind it there. Then added in a bunch of these 30-second notes. I think maybe it's 16th, whatever this is. It's just faster, like ticka 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 ticka. Main thing is like there's a bit of like a shape to the velocity that I've added, very slight, so it's like slightly moving over time. And I think I use this weird velocity shaper thing. Actually, I don't really use this stuff too often, but I added this velocity shaper thing to kind of like make it have a bit of movement. And then I if you press, I think, command, no, option, I think, I can't remember. No, yeah, it is command. If you do command on like the little guys down here, you can add this like velocity range. So if you can see, there's like a big bar behind it. So like at any point when this hits, it's going to place somewhere in between that velocity range. And that's again a way to like add some nice humanization. And then there's just these extra little accent hits that come in on the every 2 bars. In terms of the sound selection, this is just a rack that I have some of my core sounds that I like to use. So I just jumped onto those. And then in terms of any processing, we're removing some lows. We're pulling back the attack of it so it's not hitting as hard, and pulling back the sustain a bit so it's not decaying as long. Next thing is, usually after dialing in these core sounds, kick, clap, snares, open hats, closed hats, with like one shots like this programmed in by myself, then what I'll like to do is layer that in with top loops to add a little bit more character and uniqueness to the sound. And let's kind of go over that. The first one I added was this. And so this is adding a lot of hi-hat information and a little bit of extra kind of like drum, like snare fills almost. Trick here is a couple things I did here. I don't always do this. This I do quite often. So if you set the top loop to beats, have it on transients, and have it so the arrow's pointing to the right, you can dial back this, and this is going to loosen up. It's going to tighten up the decay of each hit, very similar to that transient shaper. I feel like tighter drum loops that don't decay as much, they kind of nestle into our core loops a lot better, and I think that's really important. Another thing is I've added warp markers. I think if you press Command A and Command U, it'll automatically create warp markers. And then what I have here is a groove, and what you can do is find the groove of the actual like reference track here and apply it. So what you would do is like grab like a slice of the maybe drum track from the AI split like this, and you could right click it and say extract grooves. And then that'll kind of look at like the micro timings of this little loop, and you can apply it to any of your loops or any of your parts. Not something I do all the time, to be honest, because sometimes it just sounds whack, but sometimes it sounds cool, and that's what we got going on here. In terms of any processing, removing lows, a little bit of sidechain, and some width to push to the left and right a little bit. Next thing I added in was this little guy. This was something that I was hearing in the reference track. It's almost like a little accented shaker that happens at the beginning of a lot of the bars. And so what I did is I just found like a shaker loop and then cut it up and then just place it only at the beginning. And then I have like different slices of it playing so that it's kind of changing a little bit over time. My buddy just got a couch. That's why I'm laughing. I don't know, it's a random text to get. Rude. He said couch received. So weird. We were removing some of the lows, making room for the kick and the sub. Yeah, bring back some of the attack so this isn't hitting as hard. I didn't want it to be too pronounced. A little sidechain so it's pumping, making room for the kick, and a little bit of width. Next element that I added in was this guy. Weird shit, essentially. Basically, I was looking up like percussion loops on Splice, found something interesting and layered it in here. You can see like in terms of the drum beat, that's not doing too much totally. Actually, I like that's sick as hell, and that's kind of like adding some interesting texture and character to that. So in terms of the processing, let's see if we're tightening up with a transient trick here. We have the groove applied to it as well. And then we're moving some lows, bringing back the attack, because I didn't want it to be too... I want our core hits to be taking up most of the attack, and these are more subservient to them, I would say. Some sidechain, so it's pumping, a little saturation, so it's adding some grit and texture to it. Last thing here is just a little bit of a ride, which can be cool almost more as an arrangement trick. The way that I see it is like you can build energy by having closed hat, increase it with open. You can increase it further a couple bars in by adding in a ride. That's kind of the little standard trick I'll do there. That's a kind of a good look at the drums. And then at that point you have a foundation. And then the next thing I usually will add in is the bass. Again, I do want to stress like the new way that I've been producing, the trick is to like grab an AI slice of the drums and just isolate the kick so you have control, and you can have the control of the kick and how the kick plays with the bass. And that way, because I'm fast at drums, this took maybe like 30 minutes, but still, like if you're spending 30 minutes, I'd rather not waste any time, you know what I mean? I'd rather move on fast to the next point, make sure that the whole song is sounding good, and then come back and recreate the drums. So let's now have a listen to the bass that was added in here. And with the drums. Cool. So let's go over this. So first thing is, again, the pattern. So what I've been doing a lot lately, really like this trick, is if you have like you can use AI to split out the bass as well, and then what you can do is grab like a little slice of that AI bass, and if you drag it into an empty MIDI clip, then Ableton will do this convert audio to MIDI kind of thing. And I'll kind of show you what it looks like actually, because it's close. Like this one, like it's kind of close, right? It's gonna kind of put you in the ballpark and give you like a jumping off point. But really, what you're gonna want to do is flick back and forth to the reference and what you're working on, and adjust this to kind of like dial it in. The more you do this, the better you'll get at it. But having a jumping off point is really nice, because then you're just not like randomly pulling at straws. So this is a look at the bass line that I ended up with. The idea here is to like start by like making it kind of similar to the reference. And you can also set like the scale. That way you're only hitting the right notes, which is really important. Just try to simplify it a lot. And then what I would do is introduce the vocal and adjust these bass notes so it's playing off the vocal more. It's going to push it into a territory where it's not as much of a carbon copy of the original, and you're making it so it is in service of the main hook, which is really important. It's a big philosophy that I like to talk a lot about when it comes to music production. Let's look at that. Now, moving on to sound design for the bass. Interesting thing that I do here is like a very interesting grouping or routing idea. So what I'll do is I'll start with the sub. And with the sub, the main idea is it's just a clean, it carries the low end really, really well. So I like to have a sub layer and then split that off and then have like the mid bass layers separate. And so you can go crazy on the sound design on the mid bass without it impacting the low end. And then it has the extra benefit of you're playing with a very, very simple like tone without distracting sound design, so it can help you dial in the notes a little bit better. In terms of anything else on the sound design, it's just an operator playing a sine wave, but I've just created this rack that's faster for me to work with. So what I'll do is I'll add in a bit of saturation, different types of saturation, kind of mostly to ear, but it also does help add a little bit of grit and texture to the sub, makes it come out of like crappier speakers a little bit more, and it's adding some harmonic content to like the low mids, so that it's almost bridging the gap between the sub and the mid bass layer a bit. And then some one knob sidechain here, and then now moving on to the mid bass layer. This guy. Now let's kill this up. This is all a little interesting, because I feel like this is almost more like a mid synth more than anything. But what I'm doing here in this instance is you'll notice that there's actually no MIDI clips. And so this is like if I check out the video for this one in like the playlist and on the guide. But what you can do is, instead of having it come in from the MIDI track, you can have it come in from a different MIDI track. So in this instance, it's routed from the subs. So this MIDI is being routed into this and playing this sound. So then there's a couple things you're going to want to do here. One is having a pitch device. In this instance, I'm moving it up 3 semitones from the subs position. So this way, if the mid bass doesn't sound good at that same octave, you can adjust it very quickly with a pitch device, a MIDI pitch device. And then I'm using this bass sound that I used by slicing a bit of the bass. What you can do is, like in the AI bass, if you grab a little little section of it, you can right click and then consolidate it, and then press show similar files, and it's going to show audio files and presets and all sorts of stuff in your Ableton library that sounds similar to that bass sound. And this is what you can do with like drums, and you can do with anything really. You get varying results with it, but it's a really, really cool tip. So I found that using that little trick. And then in terms of the processing, we're removing a bunch of the lows here on this track, because we want the lows to be coming from the subs. We're pulling back the attack a little bit, pushing the width a little bit, because we're not playing with like width on the sub here. We're just doing it on the mid bass layer. So we have a little bit more free reign to do whatever the hell we want on these additional layers, because our sub is nice and tight. There's nothing we can do to mess that up because it's on its own layer. It's kind of the idea. A little compression, mostly just reducing the dynamic range, having a more consistent signal. And then I ran through another instance of some sidechain, because I just wanted that to be a little bit more pronounced as an effect, I guess you could say. So that's a kind of good look at that. We have the vocals in here. Main thing is, like, I kind of treat the vocals as I do this when I'm doing like bootlegs. When I'm doing a remix, I usually like to just have the vocals and everything else my own stuff. So having the own vocal tracks in this tune, I guess this is an interesting thing to kind of see here. But the original tune is like a verse, chorus kind of situation. And so what I did is just found like a section of the tune I think it might have been the chorus. I'm not even sure at this point. But finding your own slices and just having that repeat a little bit more. Sometimes it could be cool to have like a first chorus effect in like an electronic dance song. But it's also pretty common to just create like a hook and have that hook come in and out. And that's kind of that instead of having a classical, traditional kind of song structure. So I found this little clip here, and mostly just sounds like this. And then you can see I did a little trick here with this. So it's kind of like moving in. So then when it's repeating and there's a bit of a tension, and then there's a full release when it fully plays in. And there's a little trick. It's not playing the full thing, and then it plays a bit more. So little tricks that you can do to kind of like get creative with how you're playing with the vocal. I won't go too much into it, but processing isn't very interesting either. Removing some lows. I don't know, you think this auto shift's doing anything. Played around with this little trigger gate, so every once in a while, there's a little bit of a kind of like a stutter effect to it. Some compression. Nothing honestly that interesting. There's a lot of like additional delay and reverb on the send tracks here, so that's making it a bit more spacey. That's kind of it. Then I also have this like lower Vox version, if you have a listen to this. Fall down, our bodies on the floor. That was mostly a suggestion from the artist. So actually something I'll do, and this is just a tip when you're doing like a commissioned remix, like not like a bootleg is what I mean by that. I'll make the loop and like a bit of the song structure and send it to them as quickly as possible in the process so I can get feedback. Mostly looking for like a go, no go kind of situation where if like I want to send them the vibe of the tune as quickly as possible. So if they're like, not good, then no time has been wasted. A lot of the stuff that I'm doing and trying to teach here is a lot about trying to work fast and work smart so you're not wasting time. So a big trick there would be like sending it in a little earlier so you can get feedback from the person that you're working on the remix for. That way you can make adjustments, or if they're like, yo, yeah, we don't like this, and then you can drop it and move on to something else, right? Before too much time has been wasted. I mean, feedback that I got from this was just they'd liked me to add like a lower vocal element to it, so it doesn't sound so like high pitched. So boom, that's why I added that in there, and I think that was a good choice. It does make it sound like more full and awesome, I would say. But with that said, I'm gonna move on to the melodic stuff now. I'm gonna keep the vocals paused because it's just I think annoying having me talking and then vocals playing a lot in the background too. It's just kind of distracting. But when I'm moving on to this second area, I do want you to understand is the vocal I usually have on the entire time, because as I'm adding in any additional layers, the idea is to have it be in support of that main hook. That's a big philosophy that I talk about a lot. I'm not sure if I mentioned it in this video, but having everything be in service of that hook is incredibly important, I think. And so doing everything in context as much as possible, not working on any layer in isolation, because you can make it sound cool by itself, but it needs to sound good as a cohesive song. You're making a song on an individual layer. So that's kind of the idea there. We'll go through this melodic part. Also, I do want to say one other little caveat here is when you're building up the melodic stuff, there's going to be a lot of cool tips that I'm going to show you here. And there's like that kind of mix as you go process of like pattern, sound selection, a little bit of channel strip, and mostly volume. Applying that to every layer is really important. Gives you like as you're adding new layers, you're kind of hearing it how it sounds like in the final results. You can judge each sound a little bit better. But big but here is when you're doing your own stuff, the melodic stuff is probably where you should be going a little bit on your own. Using your own sonic identity, using sounds that you like, looking up samples of stuff that you like, using presets that you like. You know what I mean? Like you kind of want to do your own thing here. I have a style, and you can get ideas from it and like copy some of it, but like kind of want to start developing your own style here is what I'm trying to say. So let's go through some of these layers. First thing I added in was like playing around with some more of the backing vocals. Kind of made like a little rhythm out of the vocal. I think this is a cool trick to do no matter what, actually, whose style it is to use elements, reuse elements, and try to create something new out of it. So what we have here is this little vocal bit. This is a vocal that I've cut into my own like rhythm that I kind of like. and then I just did some weird shit to it. So with this auto shift, which I think is, yeah, auto shift with the formant down a bunch and the pitch all the way down. So without it, it sounds like this. It's a vocal, right? And then with this, still vocally, but more like instrumental almost. I think that's a cool little trick there. Using a bit of this A1 trigger gate, so it's adding a bit of like a stutterness to it. Removing a bunch of lows, removing a bunch of the highs, so it sounds more muffled and weird, basically. A little bit of sidechain, so it's pumping, making room for the kick. A little bit of width, so it's pushed to the left to right, making room for the actual vocal down the middle. Let's hear if this is interesting. That's just grabbing a piece of the vocal and then having more of an echo on it, so it's going to echo out and then let the... it just kind of sounds cool, having a bit of the vocal echo out there. Then I added in some like pads. This is definitely something I kind of heard in the reference track. I think it was very paddy and spacey and cool. And so I was trying to add a little bit of that kind of element. So this, I just looked up a couple of different samples on Splice and tried to find stuff that was in the same key. So let's have a listen to the first one. That sounds fucking sick. And okay, this is also another cool thing. If you look up song starters, sometimes you can find really cool, very harmonically rich and very rhythmically rich, interesting things. You do want to kind of fuck with them a lot, I would say. So you can see in this instance, I've EQ'd the hell out of it. And I think it's a bit of an arrangement trick to like have it slowly opening up and closing over time. If you're having a look here, kind of closing up, opening up, that kind of thing. And so that helps it make it sound not exactly like the same thing. It's very turning it almost more into a pad is what I was trying to do. So there's a bunch of reverb on it, a little bit of sidechain, a little bit of width. Next one I added in was this one here. And so this is almost like a cool way because it's almost like they're both processed very similar. I can't remember what I was doing to the shape. I think I found this weird thing called soft motion. I was just playing with weird effects with the Shaper Box plugin, removing a bunch of lows, removing a bunch of the highs. Again, trying to turn it into kind of a pad. Added in this crystallizer so it has that cool granular echo kind of sound. And then really, but the trick here is the fact that these are two things that if you use them by themselves, they'd be kind of like not that cool of a thing to do. But if you kind of reduce, like, fuck with the EQ a bunch, add some like reverb and delay and stuff to kind of turn into a pad, and then layer them together, it starts to sound pretty interesting together. So fucking cool. So that's kind of the idea there, turning like a cool sample into a pad. And then we got a couple of these things. I'll just kind of play them together. So just kind of like a weird little call and response of a bunch of weird noises. And then there's this little guitar bit playing. Basically just found like a cool guitar rhythm, slice it up so it's almost just like one note is playing almost, but not fully. There's a bunch of stuff going on. And then played in a little pattern here. Removing some lows. This auto filter's on. Cool thing too with auto filter is set it with the envelope and the LFO, and it kind of adds a really cool moving wah sounding kind of like mouthy filtered sound, which I think is really cool. And that's kind of look at that. Let's have a listen to all of the melodic stuff kind of by itself, so you can kind of hear how everything's playing off of each other. It's really, when going through these individual layers, like some of it sounds more important than the others, but like it's really all about how they all play together as a full unit. And with the bass, kick, drums. Yeah, so sick, sounds cool as hell. Let's kind of look at the individual layers, and then the next thing that I want to go over is just the strong structure. So this is the finished track here. Main thing to like really finish like structures really fast is to build up like your layer as much as you can here. Try to almost build out your loop as if it's like the biggest, most impactful part of the song. And maybe even overproduce so you have more layers to work with when you're actually structuring and arranging it. And then the idea is you can kind of look at this as like puzzle pieces, and then grab like a whole bit of the drums, drop them here. It says sub here, so you want to grab like all of the bass and put it in here. And then the idea is just to move from left to right flicking between the reference and what you're working on and adding in like the layers that are needed and listening to what they're doing. If they have like the kick removed at the first couple bars, remove your kick, that kind of thing. You can move from left to right, paying attention every 8 to 16 bars. That's when like a smaller change is going to happen and potentially a larger song structure change. And from also by creating the arrangement track, we can see here that, okay, the bass is going to come in and you can use that as like a nice guide to help you out. And the idea is to move from left to right, building out each of these sections. And you want to kind of like really focus on what you can also do is like drop that like main loop that you made into like the last final drop so that you know that you're kind of building towards that drop. So you don't want this first drop to sound as intense as this. So instead of like worrying as you're structuring, like, oh, I got to add all these layers and make each thing sound harder and harder and harder and harder than the other, it's more of a process of elimination. So you know that this is like the full drop. So you can just remove some layers on this drop. So it still hits pretty hard, but it's not going to hit as hard as this. So that's kind of like really the main trick that I would want you to have a look at there. And then what else? There's a few other small things is like you can have on the master channel, I like to have like an EQ like this. So we're removing the low and playing with how much of the low end's coming in and out. And that's a really good way to kind of build tension and release from section to section. And it's a very fast way because it's on the master rack. So I just have this here. This is another one where it's kind of adding in like reverb and delay. And this one's adding kind of like a riser sound. So you can very easily add this in on like the master track layer with a rack like this to be making the breaks and the transitions and stuff sound a little bit more interesting and playing with the tension and release more because you're removing some of the low end information so that when the drop comes, it hits harder because you just heard a section without as much low end, right? So it's all about that kind of tension release idea. And then another big one is adding in like an effects group like this, which is all like, let me just show you some of this shit. It's just like sounds, lasers, fucking crashes, like reverse crashes and noise sweeps, all that kind of stuff. Maybe every 4 bars, every 16 bars or so. And the idea is to be subtle with this stuff. Like if like a really loud sweep and noise laser sound and stuff sounds corny as hell, but if you're mixing them in pretty subtly, so it's just reinforcing some of the elements that are already there, it can really make it sound a lot more pro and full. And it's really the key here is subtlety. And then so the last thing then is how do you actually know the tune is done? That's really hard to do. Main thing I'll do is something called pick 3. And so the idea is what you want to do is at this point when you've kind of done quite a bit, you've added in lasers and have some like little transition tricks and stuff like that. Some of the basics have been done. Then you want to like have a listen and pick the 3 things that are going to have the biggest impact on the listener. So this might not be adjusting the 200 hertz by 0.5 of a decibel on your kick drum because no one's going to hear that. But if your like breakdown doesn't sound cool and then it goes into the drop and the drop doesn't sound full, for example, you might want to go and like fix your drop. You know what I mean? Or if like it sounds like the vocal is in for the first half of the second drop, and the second half you pull out the vocal and it's not sounding full enough, maybe you need to add a lead in there. Something like that. Those bigger, more important changes is really important. And then something I like to do now is a lot of like adding a compressor and a clipper on most of these buses on or these group tracks. And then something like fast reveal or track spacer on the melodic one, sidechain to the vocal. Wait, I'm jumping a little bit. The clipper and the compressor on each group is basically an effort to reduce the dynamic range and have a bit more of a consistent audio signal. And it's going to help you be able to punch up the volume later in the final mastering stage. This fast reveal or like track spacer was what I've been using more lately. You could sidechain it to the vocal, and that way it's going to be listening to the vocal and it's going to pull down your melodic layers EQ only in the vocals frequencies and only when the vocal's playing. This is why it's kind of like ducking it in an intelligent way out of the way of the vocal. So the vocal could be heard a bit more, but then when the vocal's gone, it can bring the volume back up to normal. So it sounds like sick and full and you can hear your fucking instrumental. And then the last thing is running into like this basic mastering chain that I have. And yeah, you can grab all this in the project files. Everything except for the vocals I'm going to be having in there because that is not mine. And obviously for these reference tracks and stuff like that. But yeah, really cool project to take a look at. There's a lot of interesting stuff in the arrangement, like automation lanes, individual elements you might want to kind of hear on their own, a bunch of racks and stuff you might want to steal and start using in your own project so you can work a little bit faster and smarter. Definitely check it out. But with that said, let's do a recap of the 80-20 rule next, so you can apply what you've been learning in this video as quickly and efficiently as possible into your own productions right away, because that's really the main thing. I really want you to watch these videos and learn something and then get stuck in and actually start making some sick ass tunes.
Hi, my friend, Matt from Best Friends Club here. And if you've been paying attention to this super long video, then you've probably figured out what the 80-20 rule is when it comes to building out your songs. The goal here is to get 80% of the result with only 20% of the time, energy, and effort. And because the first key to the 80-20 rule here is to use a reference track, we're making sure that we're very easily hitting 80% of a high quality, professionally made song. In particular, we use that reference track to make sure that we're picking the right notes, sounds, and volumes as we're building out our song. The second key of the 80-20 rule here is to mix as you go in an extremely streamlined way by only focusing on the volume of each track, as well as using a simple repeatable channel strip for each track that we're adding to our songs. The third and final key is to repurpose your old project files and have a suite of powerful templates, Ableton racks, and one-knob effects that you've personalized and curated over time. If you'd like to get a head start by downloading all the racks, templates, and all the files that you've seen me use in the Ableton project file for this video, or if you'd just like to take a closer look at any of the techniques or tracks you saw me work on in this video at your own pace, you can find a link to this video's project files on screen now and at the second link that's in the YouTube description. I'm recreating a different song from the Beatport top charts every single week and making the project files available to anyone who wants them. You'll also get access to a private Discord where you can ask me and the community questions, as well as share tracks for feedback. If you or your music are not quite ready for a shot in the arm like that, I've also made you a completely free bundle of templates, samples, and special bonuses that have helped me figure out how to completely finish one new song each and every single week. And you can grab that free Ultimate Song Finishing Toolkit by visiting the first link that's in the YouTube description here. However, if you just feel like staying on YouTube for now, that's totally fine. Save that link for later and check out this playlist filled with videos just like the one you just watched, where I completely create songs inspired by tracks found in the Beatport top charts. Or if you really want to take what you've learned in this video to the next level, make sure you check out this video right here.